Welcome to the Jedi Ranger. I'm JohnBerry555, and today I'm reviewing Star Wars The Last Jedi. Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi, to be specific, as directed by Rian Johnson. Now, there's a couple of things I would like to address before we get into the heart of my review. One, this is actually the first Star Wars film I ever reviewed on my channel, so if you want to go see my original review, please do so. But this is going to be an update review with the perspective of time and all that, and the rewatch, and yes, the context of the other films that have come out, and the other supporting stories as well, that were not necessarily available at the time when the film was released. Additionally, this film was a very controversial film. I myself enjoyed it. I like it. I actually like the entirety of the sequel trilogy. What does that make me? Well, to some people that makes me a shill, I guess. But the main thing is because Star Wars, while very great, and I love it, I love the universe, and there's a lot of interesting concepts, is not and never has really intended to be high concept. And I think some people do forget that. That doesn't mean it can't be good, because it is good. And when you look at the sequel trilogy as a whole, this one is probably the most thematic, the most adventurous, the most risk-taking of the bunch, and probably the most interesting in terms of the story that they are telling. And even in terms of how they tell the story, I think perhaps might be the best. The thing is the story has a lot of elements that don't seem intuitive on first look. While The Force Awakens and The Rise of Skywalker are much more surface level in what's going on, and you can figure out the plot a lot easier, but in The Last Jedi, you gotta apply a little more critical analysis to understand what's going on. And to begin with that, I'm gonna highlight Poe's mutiny, because I think that's a very good story element that encompasses a lot of the controversy and how things can be misinterpreted, especially if you have some preconceived notions or an agenda you're trying to support. So, to begin with, the film establishes early on, before we even are introduced to Holdo, that Poe is a bit reckless, that he's a bit of a risk taker. That's established very first thing. He disobeys Leia's orders. He idolizes Leia. Keep that in mind. He idolizes Leia. He disobeys her orders and presses on the attack, and the rebellion, I should say the resistance, loses their entire fleet of bombers, and he's rightfully dressed down for it by Leia. And that's actually paralleled later on in the film when Poe's about to sacrifice himself. Yes, he's saved by Rose, and we'll talk about that later, but Poe, recognizing the situation is unattainable, does what he didn't do in that scene in the beginning of the film. Very smart there, shows his character development, but his character development was essentially learning he couldn't be the hotshot pilot always risk-taking. He was learning to be a leader, not the hero. While still being a hero because you're leading a rebellion, a resistance against an authoritarian fascist regime, so you're going to be the hero by default anyhow. But the point is, leading heroes is different than being a hero, if that makes sense the way I explained it. With that context aside, Poe is in the wrong, but the problem is that the film, I don't think, conveys that well enough, or maybe it conveys it too well. The sad thing is, a lot of people I think seem to have hate Holdo because she was a woman or woke in her purple hair. Honestly, the thing is the film did not do a proper job showing us who we were supposed to support in the mutiny as the audience, but I think that was intentional because it was supposed to be messy. In real-life military situations, a mutiny reflects just as badly upon the commander as it does the mutineers. Part of the reason with the HMS Bounty, William Bligh wrote down what he was going to tell the Admiralty on his way back to London was because he didn't want to get into any trouble himself. And part of that was because, he had his own crew to think about, but he also was that tried to protect the people who stayed loyal during the mutiny. Mutinies by their nature are messy and complex, and I think that's no different here. And I think Rian Johnson did convey that proper tone, that mutinies are complex and all that, but Holdo could have handled the situation better at the same time. I think all she needed to do was bring Poe off to the side and tell him, hey, I know you're a go-getter, you need to take some you like taking action, but we're going to try to keep this plan, what we're going to do on a need-to-know basis, so that way, in case there's any leaks, because the Force Order Tractor somehow, nothing can accidentally get leaked out. And then that would then provide additional motivation for Poe not to tell Holdo anything about him and Finn's and Rose's plan to do that canter bite jaunt. It would feed into that. I've actually talked about this before as well. But what I'm conveying here is that both characters make mistakes. And Poe's mistake was basically being reckless and not understanding the situation and just basically being the hero who takes action and not the hero who leads. For lack of a better term, he's a Robin, not a Batman. Not the best analogy, I'll admit, but it's what I came up with on the spot. But Holdo also could have handled the situation better. Poe was already the motive for being reckless. She should have recognized that he was going to be a loose cannon, that he could do something reckless, and that could jeopardize the resistance. And she should have taken action to ease his concerns, ease his worry. But she didn't, and that's on her. And I do want to mention that Poe wasn't in the mutiny alone. Lieutenant Connix, who played by Carrie Fisher's real-life daughter, by the way, but who was promoted for efforts in-universe, promoted for efforts for helping evacuate the Dakar resistance space. Several other pilots and crew members. So Holdo's keeping things close was affecting more than just Poe. If Poe just came up to a bunch of people and say, hey, what about mutiny? It may not have gone well, but there was already discontent in the ranks. And that's why a mutiny that has basically more than like true conspirators looks badly on the leader, because Holdo just did not recognize the mutiny forming among her ranks and that. So, you notice how, two things, when Leia came in, Poe was like, okay, I'm done. And when he had the plan explained to him, he was like, oh yeah, that's a good plan. He just needed to be given he didn't have to hold the whole plan, but enough to put his worries at ease. Because remember, the Resistance is not really a professional military. Poe should have known better being in the New Republic Navy at one point, but that's besides the point. The point being is that both of the characters should have learned something. And the narrative only has Poe learn something, mind you. But all that to say is, I actually like it because I like how it's messy. And even if Holdo has gotta keep things on a need-to-know basis for security, that still could have led to a mutiny as well. Lots going on there, but what I want to say is, I think this scene, that whole story arc, accompanies everything that people liked and hated about The Last Jedi. Last Jedi was a divisive film, but it was also a film you could easily debate on, like what characters made the right decisions and when. There's so much interesting stuff going on there that we could debate about. I've spent, I think, about 6 minutes talking about just one plot element, and there's more. You have the whole stuff with Luke and Rey. Luke's disconnected off himself from the Force, which is important context, mind you, which I'm kind of glazing over, but he still imparts Rey some important lessons, but he himself still gets a lesson from Yoda's Force Ghost at the end. A couple important lessons, mind you, but the biggest one being, basically, masters must learn that all pupils will grow beyond them. And then Yoda sets fire to the ancient Jedi text that Luke had been wanting to do since the start of the film, that he just never did because his own self-doubts and insecurities. But don't worry, Rey already took them, as we find out at the end. Also, this is kind of side the point, but I just love how after that, it just leaves us with Force Ghost Yoda and Luke just enjoying the fire, having a bonfire. Like, okay, where are the s'mores, guys? Come on, if you're having a bonfire, you gotta do that. And I think that was just a good way of ending Luke's arc before his end. He basically needed to relearn to be the hero everyone else saw him as. Not necessarily to live up the legend that is Luke Skywalker, but to help live what people expect and what he really is, and then inspire future people. Because what's the true hero, the hero who takes action, or the hero who helps inspire others. And that's what the scene at the end with Broom Boy was intended to represent. That Luke's legend is inspiring other people in the galaxy, people to stand up against the First Order. There's a reason why also at the end, when Rey asks Leia how they're going to rebuild all this, Leia says we have everything that they need. And yes, they have everything that they need. People to inspire hope in others to keep the fight going. I forget which character said it, but a line that they will be the spark that lights the rebellion against the First Order. Which is exactly what they are. They are the spark. They are the kindling. They can't do it alone, and we will see that in The Last Jedi. With all The Last Jedi's pacing issues, that's something you can't fault them for. They kept that theme going of the survivors in this film being the spark that lights the rebellion against the First Order. And then we have everything with Canto Bight, which is just basically a rich people are in it for the money, don't trust them. And that's also kind of the arc with DJ as well. Like, he's in it for the money, he's not in there for any ideological reasons. He may help you for a time, but don't give him your complete trust. Which is, I think, a very radical message. It's basically saying, eat the rich, without saying, eat the rich. Also true, well, not related to Canto Bight and that stuff directly, when they snuck aboard the First Order's Dreadnought, the Supremacy I should say, just that shot of the laundry room with the iron being framed like a spaceship, that is just perfect. Now, I've said a lot, and there's a lot more we can talk about, such as Crate being a salt planet, and yes, there's a scene where one of the resistance soldiers puts his finger to it and tastes it in salt. By the way, one of those two soldiers in the scene is actually Gareth Edwards, if I remember correctly. But the real point, I think, of Crate being a salt planet, which I think is kind of interesting, is salt is very important for life, believe it or not. We need salt to survive, but too much of it is also a bad thing. In some ways, it's kind of fitting that the final confrontation between the First Order and Resistance is on a salt planet. Salt is necessary for life, but at the same time, it prevents stuff from growing. So it's symbolic on multiple fronts. The Resistance gets enough salt to continue, but at the same time, if they didn't, they would drown in the salt and not be able to grow into the rebellion that they will become. But because they won the battle, they lost strategically and tactically, but they won strategically because they accomplished their goals, holding out long enough and making their escape. That's a strategic win, even though they lost tactically. So, for the First Order though, because they lost strategically, they were salted. They were unable to grow, and the Resistance now can grow because they got the salt they need. I know, my metaphor is kind of clumsy, but I know that was intentional, but I think that's a very interesting read that I think warrants a future discussion. And of course, we're going to have a whole swath of discussion in the comment section. Please, I like talking with you guys down there. But I bring that stuff up to show that this film is really well made. While I think I personally prefer The Rise of Skywalker a bit more, I think it's a bit stronger. That's only because I'm looking in the context of the story as a whole, and The Last Jedi, to understand the story it's being told in relationship to the Force Awakens, not The Rise of Skywalker. Lots of thes in this trilogy, I've noticed. But regardless of that, The Last Jedi is much more hard to interpret because it can be interpreted in so many different ways. Like, that scene with the salt, I didn't even think about it until I was out there recording this video. I didn't plan on it. I like that. I'm going to put it in. And I did. And that's the nature of good film discussion and media criticism. You can have these rich, interesting conversations. Like, everything with Kylo is so interesting. Like, Rey thinks there's good in him, which, yeah, there's might. And Luke's force projection tells Leia that he can't save Ben, but Ben's not really gone, which I think is a wonderful scene. We know what's going to come because of The Rise of Skywalker, but I think that was a great way of having it in the movie to be, well, maybe he can be saved, maybe he can't be, but he's not being saved right now from the darkness. So, Luke goes to distract him instead. And distractions have been gnawing at Kylo Ren all this film. We can talk about everything with Rey trying to save him and them fighting together, and Rey being extended a hand by Kylo multiple times till she finally closes the door on him when she closes the Falcon's ramp. Very well done in my opinion. Great symbolism and use of the set to help convey the story as well. But beyond that, ever since he killed Snoke, Ren now has to fight to lead the First Order. Yes, he uses the Force in fear to inspire loyalty, but the thing is that when presented with a distraction, he's distracted from his duties as leader of the First Order. He's so focused on getting revenge on Luke, he doesn't realize the Resistance is going to get away to live to fight another day. And just that whole scene there's so many subtle hints that Luke is not really there, but at the same time it's not intuitive at first because we're introduced to him speaking with his sister, and he interacts with C-3PO, a droid. So that either proves that the Force is so strong he can make mechanical things see, or droids are sentient and can access the Force if they are sentient enough, which I think is a more interesting interpretation. Yes, Skippy the Jedi droid from Legends is a bit wonky, but in principle, not necessarily opposed to it depending on how a story goes. But all that was just to show us the audience that Luke was there and people could see him. It wasn't just a Leia thing. That's, I think, the key there. And then he goes and the fight is so amazing, but he avoids being touched by Kylo, whether in person, by lightsaber, it doesn't matter. And he's not even moving the sword when he's doing it, unlike Kylo. And showed to us the audience that Luke is not there. And then when Ren discovers it, Luke is like, "See you around, kid," and vanishes, and then he becomes one with the Force and all that. But I bring that up to show that it's just really well done, lots of good symbolisms, and I think a good way of pointing it is that Rian Johnson knew how to exploit a character's flaws to advance the story in a way that J.J. Abrams wasn't as good for. Abrams, perfect at setting up stories, but when we get to The Rise of Skywalker, we'll talk about how he's not maybe the best at finishing stories, which a lot of people I know do agree with. But there's more I can talk about, like, throughout The Last Jedi, Hux is made fun of. There's the whole thing where Poe trying to basically make fun of him, or should I say, undermine him during the transmission at the beginning while Poe was stalling for time. Yes, that's what he was doing for, but he was also trying to undermine Hux's leadership among the First Order. And then Ren just totally undermines Hux's leadership after Snoke is killed. Which, by the way, I think it was very interesting in the moment to kill Snoke, but I don't know if that was the best decision as a whole given what they decided to do in The Rise of Skywalker, but I don't necessarily hate it. It's just, was that the best choice for the story that they might have been thinking of telling at the time? Lots of interesting stuff, a lot of stuff to go through. But I think I'm going to end my review here. I've spoken for about 18-19 minutes now, and I want to keep the discussion going in the comment section, so let me know your thoughts down there. I also, and probably after I do my review for The Rise of Skywalker, I have another video about what I would have done if I was in charge of the sequel trilogy. While still keeping things mostly the same, we'll find out in about a week or two for that. But in the meantime, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below, and may the Force be with you always. Thank you for watching my video. I do hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please be sure to give this video a like and share. Also, consider subscribing to my channel to stay up to date on all my latest content. In the meantime, thank you for watching, and as always, have a good day, a good night, wherever you are. May the Force be with you always.